Medea, the Witch of Colchis, Soichiro's bride, and Jason's terrifying ex. But what about the Medea of Fate Grand Order? How well does she compare to her mythological counterpart? And what grade would I give her depiction? Let's do this. Medea is a caster class servant, both as the original caster from Fate Stay Night as well as her Lily version. And going off of the myths about her, this is a perfect choice. Using magic to heal or to do very much the opposite of that, it's what Medea does. Also, you could argue that, since she was the first, the caster class was basically made for her from the start. As far as magic users from Mythology go, Medea is one of the oldest and most famous. Getting into her character design, Medea certainly looks the part of a witch, wearing long robes and that cowl in her first ascension, which is pretty much how she looks for almost all of her screen time in Fate Stay Night. Her second ascension gets rid of the cowl, while the third gets rid of that long cape. It's kind of a cool way to represent how, as you level Medea up, she gradually warms up to the protagonist, looking less like the evil witch of legend. As for her final ascension, we get some neat Easter eggs such as her collections of potions, herbs, and the golden fleece beside her. While this exact version of Medea is different from artistic depictions of the character made in the past millennia, the vibe of the character as a witch or spellcaster is certainly there. As for Medea Lily, apparently this originated as a joke picture in an art book, but ended up becoming a full character in her own right. Much like her older self, Medea Lily doesn't change very much between her ascension forms, only adding some bits here and there. But also like her older self, Medea Lily is quite obviously a spellcaster with a staff and fancy clothes. She also looks notably more like a princess here, which makes sense because, well, that's exactly what Medea was. In Medea Lily, we are seeing her when she first met Jason, while her older version is Medea after Jason's betrayal and her revenge. I'd say the contrast between these two characters is quite good, clearly telling the story of how Medea changed during the course of her life. Medea Lily is basically a friendly and good-natured magical girl, while the older Medea has become much darker and intimidating after her unpleasant life experiences. Overall, I'd say both of Medea's depictions are quite good. It may not be similar to past depictions of the character, but the spirit of Medea as a talented magic user is quite clear to see. Moving into her skill set, Medea's first skill is Rapid Words of Divine, which is the biggest single MP charge in the entire game, maxing out at 150%. Seems kinda overkill to me, since you hit 100% as early as level 4. Anyway, this skill is a long-lost magical skill from the Age of Gods, allowing Medea to use powerful magics almost instantaneously. This is at the root of her being such a powerful magic user in the Fate franchise, since she doesn't have to worry about long incantations or preparation in order to unleash a powerful spell. Medea just does it. This really doesn't need much explaining. Medea is a masterful spellcaster. More than that, Medea is the granddaughter of Helios, the Greek sun god, so the divine part of the skill name, Rapid Words of Divine, isn't just for show. This divine heritage is a major factor in why Medea is so powerful. Medea's second skill is Argon Coin, giving her a self-heal. If you remember from my video on Jason, the Argon Coin is just another name for the Golden Fleece. Since Medea was not only the princess of Colchis, the kingdom where the fleece was kept, but also helped Jason acquire it, her connection to the Golden Fleece is quite clear. One more thing, the fleece itself was guarded by a dragon in the original myth, and apparently the fleece can actually be used to summon that dragon, just not by Medea. Her inability to do this is what started the falling out between Medea and her original master in Fate Stay Night. More on that later. Anyway, this is a good skill for her. Medea's third skill is Circe's Teaching, allowing her to remove debuffs and increase MP gain for a single ally for a turn. Now this one is a bit troublesome. Circe, as we know, is Medea's aunt, her father's sister, daughter of the sun god Helios, and herself a minor goddess of considerable power. Now in the FGO materials, it is said that Medea learned magic at the Temple of Hecate together with Circe. There is actually a story where Circe and Medea are sisters, daughters of the goddess Hecate. But based upon the fact that Circe gets annoyed whenever Medea calls her aunt, it's pretty clear that FGO didn't go for them being siblings. But since that is the case, as far as I can tell, Circe and Medea only actually met once, after Medea and the Argo had fled Colchis. I'll be saying more about this later, but the gist of it is, Circe didn't teach Medea magic. Both of them are naturally talented due to their divine heritage. So this skill is kind of a fail. Shifting over into Medea Lily's skill set, her first skill is also Rapid Words of Divine. It's exactly like the one her older version has, both maxing out at 150% MP charge. I've got nothing more to add here. Medea Lily's second skill is Poison Defense, removing poison and restoring HP for all allies. Now, Medea certainly knows a thing or two about poison, but that's more for using poison rather than curing it. Despite this, Medea is also known as a capable healer, and what good healer wouldn't be able to do something about poison? Actually, one notable moment when Medea does some healing is in the aftermath of the Argo's escape from Colchis. One crew member of the Argo was seriously wounded during that whole mess, and so Medea used her magics to heal them. Who was that crew member? Atalanta. Medea Lily does get a My Room line with Atalanta that mentions healing, but it isn't specifically about this moment, sadly. Still, the point is, Medea does do healing, and I guess she could also heal poison too, even if Medea's usual interactions with poison tend to be the opposite of that. Lastly, Medea Lily's third skill is Ephemeral Love, increasing HP recovery amount for a turn for a single ally, as well as giving that ally buff removal resist for 3 turns. This is quite clearly a reference to Medea's relationship with Jason, since ephemeral means something that is short-lived, fleeting, transient, etc. Since this is Medea Lily, her feelings for Jason are still strong, and so this skill fits her perfectly. Also, it's yet more healing bonuses, which are always nice. Medea's noble phantasm is Rule Breaker, whereupon she freezes the enemy in place, brandishes her dagger with that crazy zigzag blade, and then stabs the enemy with it. This MP does heavy damage to a single enemy, removes all buffs from that enemy, and restores some MP gauge depending upon overcharge. This is one of the iconic noble phantasms of the Fate franchise, and it certainly makes its presence felt during the plot of Unlimited Blade Works. This weapon is the ultimate anti-magic tool, able to undo magic, magical beings, and even servant contracts. It's certainly very powerful both in-story and in-game, but what about the lore? Well, Medea in the myths didn't have a weapon like this, or really any special weapon at all as far as I can tell. Rather, the MP Rule Breaker is meant to be an abstract representation of her treacherous nature, being the Witch of Betrayal. Medea certainly did engage in some treachery and deceit, so that much does connect to her character. I'll be getting into detail about this soon enough, but for now let's move on. Medea Lily's MP is Painbreaker, whereupon she channels her magic, floats up into the air, and casts that spell upon her allies. This MP heals allies, removes their debuffs, and increases their debuff resistance depending upon overcharge. I've already mentioned that Medea made use of healing spells in the myth, so that part is fine. Rule Breaker and Painbreaker are basically meant to be two sides of the coin that is Medea, with Painbreaker being powered by her affection while Rule Breaker concerns her treachery. Of the two, Painbreaker has a closer connection to myth because Medea did actually do healing, but really, both of these MPs are more conceptual than being actual skills Medea used. Abstractions that represent how Medea started off as a naive, innocent princess, but who later became a murderous witch who both betrayed others and was herself betrayed. Now, while I do tend to prefer when MPs are less symbolic and more direct, these still do work for Medea. But if there is one thing that is missing from Medea's kit, it's poison. Now, while she did make some use of it during Fate Stay Night, it's not featured in any of her FGO skills. Why I'm making a fuss about poison will become abundantly clear once we get into Medea's story. Medea's craft essence is Hecate's Staff, featuring her staff. Notably, Medea uses the same staff in both her Lily and older versions. While you don't see Medea with a staff in her classical depictions, I'm giving this a pass because magic users and staffs kinda go together. It's not like she's pulling out a battle axe or something. Hecate is the Greek goddess of magic, and Medea was actually a priestess of Hecate in addition to being the princess of Colchis, so that connection is solid. But there is an issue with the CE's text. While her sadness about being unable to return home does work, it again brings up having trained in magic together with Circe, which I've already debunked. So this CE is mixed, a clear link to the myth, but also flawed. As for Medea Lily, her bond CE is Infinite Pancakes, featuring a plate of pancakes covered in fruit. Yum. Now, on the surface, there isn't a connection between this bond CE and anything in Medea's background. There wasn't an episode in her story where she cooked pancakes in between the parts where she either healed or murdered someone. The CE's text talks about her liking pancakes, wishing there were more, and so created an infinite amount of ingredients, causing all sorts of shenanigans. Also, we can't forget that one interlude where she makes pancakes out of a demon god pillar. So what's the story with this craft essence? The best I can come up with is that this is kind of a cutesy way of portraying something about Medea's character. Specifically, her enthusiasm to help those she cares for, and later her desire for revenge or retribution, has a tendency to be taken to the extreme. Like, there are quick and simple ways to deal with an issue, and then there's what Medea does. If you don't know what I mean by Medea being overzealous and going to extremes, you will soon enough. Moving into Valentine CEs, Medea CE is Merry Mary, featuring a white chocolate ram with some fancy decorations. I'm going to be blunt here. This is secretly one of the best Valentine CEs in the entire game. I'm serious. While this is presented as a cute and random gift, this actually has a really dark connection to the story of Medea. It also connects to what I just said about Medea taking things to the extreme. Anyway, when Jason returns to Colchis with the Golden Fleece, he expects that he will have his throne returned to him. That's what the deal was, after all. But Pelias decides to renege upon the deal, because of course he did. He likes his throne, after all, and being a deal breaker always works out well for people in Greek mythology, right? Anyway, what Medea decides to do is put on a demonstration of her magic, inviting Pelias' 2 daughters to observe. Medea takes an old elderly ram, chops it up, throws the bits into a pot, adds some herbs and other magical goodies, and then suddenly a young ram leaps out of the pot. That's a nice trick. Well, Pelias' daughters decide that it would be a great idea to make their father young too, so they kill him, chop him up, and throw him into a pot, hoping to get Medea's help to make their father young again like she did with the ram. But this is the outcome Medea was going for. In other words, Medea tricked Pelias' own daughters into killing him, as payback for Pelias refusing to honor his deal with Jason. Now, I am okay with the principle of Medea wanting to make Pelias pay for betraying Jason, but yikes, that is seriously messed up. And this is just one example of the sorts of gruesome things Medea gets up to. Suffice to say, this Valentine CE is deceptively lore relevant, making it one of the best Valentine CEs we have, and a very pleasant surprise. Medea Lily's Valentine CE is Chocolate Jewel, featuring a dish of fancy chocolates. Despite looking like a box of chocolates you might get from a store, Medea Lily actually made these herself. Alas, unlike her grown-up self's Valentine CE, there really isn't anything character-specific here, unless you count the fact that one of the chocolates is shaped like the head of her staff. The curse of first-year Valentines, I suppose. Or maybe they just expended all their creativity with the older Medea's CE. No matter. And now for characterization, starting with a look into the myths surrounding Medea. As I've mentioned a few times in this video already, Medea is the princess of Colchis, and the granddaughter of the sun god Helios, with this divine heritage playing a major part in why she is so good at magic. There is some debate over just how much divinity is in Medea, whether she is more mortal or divine, but there is no question that the gods of Olympus get involved in her life, for better and for worse. Usually the latter. This is Greek mythology we are talking about. Anyway, by all accounts, Medea had a relatively pleasant childhood, growing up as a princess and becoming a priestess of Hecate, the goddess of magic. Everything was nice and fancy and all that, but then, of course, everything went wrong once a ship arrived in Colchis, the Argo. I did a video on Jason already, so you can watch that if you wish to learn more about his adventures specifically. Anyway, Jason shows up to acquire the Golden Fleece in order to get his throne back from the usurper Pelias, and King Aetes of Colchis agrees if Jason can accomplish 3 tasks. But these 3 tasks are basically designed to be fatal, since Aetes doesn't want to give the fleece up. So the goddess Hera, who looks out for Jason, decides to persuade Aphrodite to get her son Eros to make Medea fall in love with Jason, and so to have Medea help Jason out with her father's tasks. Medea agrees to help Jason, but wants him to marry her in exchange. The first task is for Jason to plow a field with some fire-breathing oxen, so Medea gives him an ointment to keep him from getting roasted. The second task, and the one I wish to give particular attention to, is for Jason to then sow, or plant, the teeth of a dragon into that field. What Jason doesn't know, and what Medea tells him, is that these dragon's teeth will turn into warriors that will then kill Jason. Medea's solution here is quite simple. Plant the teeth, then toss a rock into the crowd of warriors to confuse them, causing them to attack each other and allow Jason to escape. I highlight this because these Dragon Tooth Warriors, while only showing up during Medea's quick card attack animation in FGO, show up extensively in Fate's Day Night, minions that Medea conjures up to help in battle. She's not the only character who uses them in this franchise. You see them in Apocrypha too. But it's Medea who these warriors are actually lore relevant to. The third task is for Jason to fight and kill the dragon that guards the Golden Fleece. Which, I mean, we do have dragon slayers in Chaldea, but it's not exactly an easy thing to do. Medea decides to cast a spell upon the dragon, putting it to sleep, and so allow Jason to grab the fleece and allow them to flee Colchis. Medea's father and brother pursue the Argo, attacking them and wounding Atalanta as I mentioned earlier. Medea then decides to take her brother, kill him, chop him up into pieces, and then toss the pieces overboard. Her father, grief-stricken, calls off the pursuit in order to collect the pieces of his son. I mean, I suppose that is one way to deal with that problem, but Medea just killed her brother for a guy she basically only just met. While it is true that she has been charmed by Eros, this is the first clear warning sign that Medea is capable of some seriously horrific violence. After this, Medea and Jason stop by the island of Aea, the residence of her aunt Circe, hoping to get her help to cleanse Medea of the crime of having killed her brother. Medea does try to be evasive about what exactly she did that needs purification, but Circe figures it out pretty quickly. While Circe does agree to help since they are family, she then tells Medea to leave, clearly being upset by what Medea did. I mean, Medea did kill Circe's nephew, so that makes sense. This, as I mentioned before, is the only time we know of that Medea and Circe actually meet. After this, Jason, Medea, and the rest of the Argonauts continue the journey back to Iolcus, notably stopping by Crete on the way where they have to fight the bronze giant Talos, the same one linked to Europa. Medea uses her magic here to defeat Talos, and so allow the Argo to continue on its way, finally returning home to Iolcus. Despite the deal that Jason would get his throne back if he returned home with the fleece, Pelias decides not to honor the deal. Medea's response to this, I covered that when talking about her Valentine CE. Medea's really into dismemberment, isn't she? However, Medea getting Pelias murdered doesn't go down very well, and so Jason and Medea are forced to flee Iolcus, eventually settling in the city of Corinth. There they remain for about 10 years, getting married and having numerous children together. Notably, at one point, Zeus himself tries to get together with Medea, but she turns him down. As you might expect, this got Medea some major favor with Hera, which is about to become really important. After 10 years of marriage while living in exile, the king of Corinth, Creon, not the same Creon that appears in the story of Epidus, approaches Jason with an offer to marry his daughter, Glossy. Jason decides to accept, not being happy living in exile. He had wanted to be a king after all. The whole point of him going on the quest to obtain the Golden Fleece was to get his throne back from the usurper Pelias. But marrying Glossy meant that Jason was betraying Medea. And, well, that wasn't exactly a good idea. Medea's response to being abandoned by Jason is probably the most infamous part of her legend. First, Medea sent a dress to Glossy, Jason's bride-to-be, a dress soaked in poison. Trying to save his daughter, the king Creon rushes to help Glossy, only to get himself poisoned and so leading to the deaths of both Glossy and Creon. After this, Medea then decides to kill her children with Jason, to destroy both his legacy and his future. After showing Jason what she had done, she then mounts a flying chariot provided by her grandfather, the god Helios, and flies off with the corpses of her children, leaving Jason broken and alone, his own death coming not long after. Medea fled to Athens, where she married King Aegeus, the one that the Aegean Sea is named after, and started a new family with him for a number of years. But then Aegeus' long-lost son Theseus returned home, threatening the succession of Medea's new son to the throne of Athens. Medea tried to poison Theseus too, but King Aegeus stopped her and chased her out of Athens with her son. From here, there is some variation as to what Medea did next. One version of her story has her returning to Colchis, discovering that her father had been overthrown by her uncle, and so killing said uncle in order to get her father back on the throne. Another version has her going east to live among a tribe in what is now Iran, a tribe that would name themselves the Medes in her honor. We don't know much about the Medes since they didn't leave behind written records, but they were a notable power in the region, one of the states that helped put an end to the Assyrian Empire, until the Medes themselves were conquered and absorbed by Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Achaemenid Empire. Persia, of course, would then have a bit of a history with Greece, but that is a story for another time. Interpretations of Medea's story, particularly her revenge against Jason, have been debated and examined for over 2,700 years now, with opinions shifting along with the values of the times. Some treat Medea sympathetically, saying that she was justified in wanting revenge against Jason. Others put greater emphasis on her being a witch, a wicked woman who would go so far as to murder her own children for revenge. When it comes to the Fate franchise, I would argue that they lean in a more sympathetic direction, but without hiding the fact that Medea gets up to some seriously evil stuff. Her first appearance is, of course, in Fate's Day Night, where she is the original caster servant of the franchise. Now, for two of those routes, Fate and Heaven's Feel, Medea is basically a non-entity. In the later part of the Fate route, Medea shows up to attack the Emiya household, only to get skewered by Gilgamesh. In Heaven's Feel, Medea is one of the first servants to fall, either being killed by Saber after having been driven to kill her master, or being taken down by True Assassin. Her corpse is later used by Zoka and Mato to attack Shiro and Rin, but it is then destroyed. In contrast to both of these appearances, her role in the middle route, Unlimited Blade Works, is much more significant, being the major antagonist for much of that story. She sets herself up at Ryudo Temple, using it as her stronghold while she drains mana from the town's population. That she is willing to use the life force of innocence, much less that whole bit where she abducts Taiga, makes it clear that Medea is not a very nice person. At the same time, she is also portrayed as a victim, having been enchanted into falling for Jason, only to have Jason abandon her, leaving her alone in a foreign land with no friends or allies. In other words, Medea was not born evil, but turned to it only after being used and betrayed by others. Deep down, there is still a decent person underneath all of that malice and violence. And that better side of Medea can come out either at random moments or if she finds someone who actually treats her decently. The first time is when she is first summoned, where she ends up with a master who is, to put it bluntly, a pompous ass who thinks child sacrifice is acceptable. The two quickly fall out, with Medea freeing the captive children and killing her master, even if it means she will end up disappearing soon because of it. This does not happen though, since Medea then has probably the first stroke of good fortune she's had since meeting Jason. Soichiro Kuzuki just happens to be walking nearby, runs into Medea, and decides to help her out. For someone like Medea, this is pretty much the opposite of what she expects from other people. But since Kuzuki actually is sincere and doesn't treat Medea like trash, she ends up falling for him, and ultimately sacrifices her life to protect him. Not quite what you would expect from someone called the Witch of Treachery, is it? While they don't get a happy ending in UBW, they certainly do in the various spin-offs and side stories made since then. Moving into FGO, while the romantic element is not present, Medea does seem happy in Chaldea as well. Like with most of the original Fate Stay Night cast, Medea doesn't get a lot of screen time, at least not in the main story. She does pop in during Salem, but that's really just to help introduce Circe. There is her interlude where it's made clear that Medea still has a grudge against Jason, but that's understandable. We also have that incident where Medea runs into Eros during the 2023 Valentine's event, but I'm saving the conversation about that for the Eros video. Lastly, Medea is a recurring character in the Gura Gura events, where she serves as a comedy stand-in for Mori Motonari, at least until we get Mori Motonari as a servant. I mean, I have no proof that we will, but we did get Takeda Shingen in Gura Gura 8, which was a pleasant surprise. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. As for Medea Lily, well, she was made for FGO, and so she actually does appear in the main story, specifically in Okeanos. At first she just seems like she's tagging along with Jason, despite their history and his unpleasant behavior. But at the end of the Singularity, Medea Lily proves to be the true mastermind behind the events of Okeanos, having manipulated Jason throughout. At the same time, it is also revealed that Medea Lily herself was being controlled by another, a mage that she had fought and been defeated by. Considering how powerful Medea is, that's our first clear warning that we are dealing with a very dangerous magic user as an enemy, whose identity is soon revealed to us in London. Aside from this, Medea Lily makes a few other appearances, such as in Atlantis, Heian Kyo, or the Aeon Spring Breeze event. While she is technically meant to be the younger Medea, it is made clear that she still has the memories of her older self. It creates this weird situation where she acts like a friendlier person, but you have to be careful, otherwise you might get a very nasty surprise. Jason found that out the hard way in Okeanos. As a whole, I'd say that Medea's character is quite consistent with her mythical depiction. A terrifying enemy, but also someone that only became that way due to the mistreatment of others. When she meets people who are willing to accept her, well, let's just say that we end up seeing a very different side of Medea. And now for the verdict. What grade would I give Medea's depiction in Fate Grand Order and the wider Fate franchise? Well, her character design and skill set are pretty good, though the lack of poison and suggesting Circe was Medea's teacher does hurt a bit. As for characterization, it's solid. It's been solid since the original Fate Stay Night. But because she basically finished her character development back then, it means Medea largely sticks to being a guest character in FGO. Medea Lily is interesting in that we get to see what Medea might have been like before her life was ruined, but that's about as far as that goes. Medea is familiar to us now, and so there isn't really anything more to learn about her. But when you are moving into storylines where you are meeting a bunch of new faces, it can be nice to have at least one familiar character there who can just tag along for the ride. To me, that is what Medea's FGO role has been, introducing us to characters like Jason or Circe who can then begin to tell their own stories. Medea has already had her time in the spotlight. While the lack of big stories for Medea in FGO might be disappointing, there is another way to look at it, namely that Medea in the Fate franchise has already been very well portrayed. She doesn't need more screen time to fix past mistakes or to flesh out the character more. There are small flaws, but overall Medea's existing depiction is very solid. And so for a final grade, I am going to give Medea, the Witch of Colchis, a B. If you would like to learn more about the person who ruined Medea's life and has been paying for it ever since, check out my video on Jason here. Until next time.